Okay, so this is more of a when than it is an if at this point. These are fake, but probably not for long. Red's about to come out. Okay, it's 2012 now. Sorry, I don't make the rules. I really like how they feel. I feel like they just look strange because they're literally fake and like they don't match. But like, welcome back to another episode of me doing this for a video and then not filming the video for another 45 minutes and instead having an identity crisis. Hey guys, it's Nicole. Welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, don't forget to subscribe. I post a ton of other Taylor Swift content, and I have like one other book related video, but I'm trying to kind of get more into that. So if that sounds interesting to you, hit the subscribe button and turn the little bell icon on so you get notifications every time I make a new video. But I have seen a lot of people doing online recommendations of books based on Taylor Swift songs. That sounds like a lot of work to figure out a book that goes perfectly for each song, so I figured it would be easier to have books that embody an entire album's theme and concept, kind of more so than the individual songs. If you disagree with any of the albums that I categorize these books into, that's fine. You can just put down below where you would rank them. Also, if you have anything else to add, please feel free to do that. I like tormented myself trying to categorize these books. Also, some of her songs are inspired by actual books. I didn't include those because I feel like that's kind of self-explanatory. I also haven't read some of them, but yeah, let's just get straight into it. I'm going to give a quick description of what I think each album embodies to kind of explain my choices. So we're starting off with the debut album, the self-titled Taylor Swift. I view this album as very naive and youthful, kind of like having your heart on your sleeve and a lot of wanting to find your people and your purpose, like your place in this world. So the first book I would recommend for this album is To Kill a Mockingbird. This is literally the copy that I accidentally stole from my 10th grade teacher, but I can't do anything about that now. I just think this is super coming of age. The main character is super naive. She's like 5 or 6 when this book takes place. I think it fits really well. The next book I would recommend, I do not have a copy of, but it's The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. This is another classic. It deals with teenagers in the 50s during high school. It's also set in my home state, Oklahoma, so that's pretty cool. And I think it was one of the first young adult books that was actually written by a teenager. I just think it fits this album really well. There's a lot of realizing things. The next one I would recommend is Will Grayson by John Green. This is about two people meeting who have the same name. There's a high school musical that takes place in it. I think one of the best friends is actually gay, and then he gets his own sequel. If I'm being completely honest with you, I can't remember a whole lot about this book, but I do remember it just having the vibes that I'm looking for this album. Next is the Click series. This is for people who I guess are kind of more like middle grade readers, but I remember really liking these. Deals with a lot of just like cliquish mean girls. Again, the kind of theme of wanting to fit in. I only have I think this is the 7th book, but yeah, I think the main girl, Claire, who like doesn't fit in with the other girls, that was giving me the same vibes as protagonist Taylor from Debut. I also read this one a very long time ago. As you can tell, my mom scribbled my name all over it, but this is 2 books in one. It's Saving Zoe and Faking 19, both by Allison Noel. So the one called Saving Zoe is about this 15-year-old girl whose sister was brutally murdered. I know that's kind of dark for the debut album, but hear me out. So when you're 15 years old, it's already hard enough like navigating high school and trying to just figure out where you belong. Losing someone like an older sibling makes things become even more confusing. So the girl Echo, who's 15 years old, who lost her sister, ends up finding her sister's diary after she passes away, and she just uncovers like a bunch of her sister's secrets, and it's a lot of confused, misguided high school feelings, and they become even more complicated because of this. And the second one, Faking 19, I think is super debut album themed because it's about the 17-year-old girl who literally fakes her age and pretends she's 19 years old. She meets these 2 older guys, and it's just very naive, hard on your sleeve kind of vibes from her. There's some rocky friendships going on in it. Again, lots of realizing things in your young age. So the next book I have, it's so tiny. It's also, my mom scribbled my name in multiple places on this book. This is The Perks of Being a Wallflower. This deals with Charlie, the main character, who is starting high school. Or every single one of these books set in high school. I think they are, but it fits the theme. So he's dealing with making friends. Also, this book handles mental health really well and just like mental illness. It has a really good portrayal of all of those things, but it's written in the style of like diary entries as Charlie's writing too. It says "Dear Friend" is how each entry starts. But yeah, I also think this is a pretty realistic depiction of high school when a lot of representations of it in media can be just not at all what it actually is. So the next album is Fearless. I view this one as very romantic, obviously, but also it's really brave. Like, it's kind of bold. It can be really sharp-tongued and like biting at times, and straightforward and decisive. Like, the fearless protagonist like knows what she wants. So because I'm getting such brave vibes from this one, I gotta recommend the Harry Potter series. It's this big boy right here. I also really wanted to just show off my set. Okay, it's beautiful. I love it. But definitely the brave aspects of Fearless, I think they fit. The Harry Potter series, I actually just finished reading the whole series for the very first time in my life a couple months ago. I highly recommend anyone who hasn't done it. It doesn't matter how old you are, honestly. I feel like I wouldn't have liked it as much when I was younger, like in elementary school. So I'm kind of glad I waited. But yeah, very bold. It can be a little bit romantic at times, but straightforward, gutsy, brave, and it's a classic. Like I said, kind of like how Fearless is for us long-term Swifties. Okay, so the next book that I would recommend is the Book of Ivy. This is an apocalyptic kind of one. After a brutal nuclear war, the United States was left decimated. A small group of survivors eventually banded together, but only after more conflict over which family would govern the nation. The West falls lost, and 50 years later, peace and control are maintained by marrying the daughters of the losing side to the sons of the winning group in a yearly ritual. So this girl from the losing side, she has to marry one of the guys from the winning side, and her family decides she's going to kill him, and that's how they're going to regain power. So she goes into this marriage thinking this guy's going to be absolutely horrible, like her family has told her he would be her whole life, and then she realizes that he is not what she was expecting. So this one definitely has vibes of like Romeo and Juliet love story, anybody? And she's kind of torn between her loyalty to her family versus her growing love for him. Definitely romantic and interesting. It's also part of a series. I think there's, is it 3 books? It might be 2 or 3. Taylor Swift also has a song called Ivy. Oh my god. The next book I would recommend is Dry. I just read this one maybe a year ago. My boyfriend got it for me, but it is seriously is one of the greatest books I've ever read, especially in the, what's the word cup? What's the name of this genre? In the apocalyptic genre. Southern California runs out of all water, like the taps just completely run dry. This book will make you want to drink a lot of water. You're definitely going to be very hydrated over however long of a period it takes you to read this. I would kill for this book to be made into a movie. It's very actiony. It's a complete page turner. This book sent me into a spiral. As I said, I live in Oklahoma, but I couldn't stop myself from researching literally where our water comes from because I just got panicked. It just makes you panic. And I think the threat is very real, especially for certain areas on the earth. But the main characters are young adults or high schoolers. There are a few of them, and I think it's told from multiple points of view depending on the chapter, but they are in high school, and obviously when you're met with this kind of situation, it takes a lot of bravery from someone. So I just felt like it's a really fearless book. It's freaking horrifying what these people are going through, and they still decide they want to persevere and try to find water. I'm terrible at explaining things. Just go to the Goodreads. But yeah, freaking amazing. Okay, so when I was making these lists, I was literally just going through all the books I've read in recent years and trying to kind of fit them into categories if they did, and if I liked the books enough to recommend them to you guys. So one that I came across was called The Wednesday Wars by Gary Schmidt. I can't remember completely what this one was about, but the description really gave me Fearless vibes, and I rated it 5 stars, which makes me really upset that I can't remember like anything about it. It won a Newbery Award. This also takes place in the past. It's between the years of 1967 and 1968. It takes place in New York with this high school kid. Nope, he's in 7th grade. He ends up dealing with a bully. There's also the issue of the Vietnam War going on at the same time. And the very end of the blurb says, as fate sneaks up on him again and again, he finds motivation in the most unexpected places and musters up the courage to embrace his destiny in spite of himself. Also, I remember his sister being someone who really wanted to be like a flower child. And I think his dad was like not okay with that kind of lifestyle. It was just very like conflict among families as well as bullies and with teachers, I believe. And I think he was just a really gutsy character. I wish I could remember more, but you can go and read the description on Goodreads and see if you're interested in it. I rated it 5 stars for a reason. I just can't remember what that reason was. Okay, so the next book that I have to recommend is The Sky is Everywhere by Jandy Nelson. I think I've read this book multiple times when I was younger. This is again another book where the main character's older sister dies. She's not murdered. She has some sort of health condition and she ends up passing away. There's some really, I think toxic, but I'm not completely sure because I can't remember. There's just some really intense love interests going on, which is very The Way I Loved You off of Fearless. She also plays the clarinet. I think she's in band in high school, which is like You Belong With Me music video. It just has those high school Fearless vibes. I also rated this one 5 stars. I really think you guys should read this one. She has a lot of really good character development even throughout all these toxic love situations that happen to her. One of them has to do with literally her deceased sister's boyfriend. Like, it's It's nuts. It's fearless, I'm telling you. I really wanted to actually pull out my physical copies for you guys because I never do that, but it turns out I've just made a huge mess of my room. So the next album is Speak Now. I'm literally dropping these. So the way I view Speak Now is very bold. I view Fearless as kind of like brave and impulsive, I guess, but Speak Now is bold and confessional. It's also really timeless. I think it just has a lot of those classic fairy tale vibes, and it has like dreamy elements to it as well. So that's how I'm kind of viewing these books. So the first book that I would recommend based on Speak Now is the Tales of Magic series by Edward Eager. I read this series at the start of the pandemic because I really needed some nice escapism. It's fairy tale themed, but it's like these children who are discovering magic is real. I'm just really getting that fairy tale vibe from Speak Now more than any of the other albums, so I thought I would put those in that category. But it's really good, and it's kind of vintagey. I think these books were actually written in the 60s. They're so good, they're so cute, they're really fast, easy reads. There's like knights in shining armor. The one, Magic by the Lake, I'm pretty sure had mermaids in it. Like, it was just so fun, magical, escapist. The next I would recommend is the Mary Poppins series. I have the first one, and it's also in Russian. I decided to go to Ukraine to get the first book for some reason. But anyways, if you've seen the Disney movie, you probably have. It's just really cute. It's so much fun, and it's so nostalgic to me because I'm pretty sure I read them when I was younger. I also believe I read series like, I think it was Miss Piggly Wiggly or something, and just like enchanting nannies who are like magic, and the kids suspect it, but the parents are like, oh, you're crazy. It's just really cute. Okay, so the next one I would recommend is My Sister's Keeper. I know that sounds a little bit odd, but hear me out. It's about two sisters. One of them has leukemia, and then the parents end up having the other sister pretty much just so she can be like a donor for her older sister. She does like blood donations for her and some other stuff. I can't remember all the technicalities. She's a bone marrow match for her older sister, and the two sisters end up having to stand up for what they actually want. The younger sister doesn't just want to be a bone marrow match. That was the whole reason she was conceived. And then the older sister is kind of grappling with her life and having to deal with so much pain and kind of what she actually wants versus what her parents are kind of wanting for her. So I think it is just really headstrong younger characters in this book that remind me of Speak Now. I would also recommend The Silver Star by Jeanette Walls. This is set in the 70s in California. It's about two young girls, like literally young, like one's 12 and one's 15, and their mom abandons them and takes off and leaves them with like just a little bit of money. So they end up taking a bus to their uncle's house. I remember there just being a lot of adversity for these two really young people, and they have to adjust to this completely new situation. There's a lot of symbolism in this book. It's just the way the characters are that feels very Speak Now to me. They have to like find themselves through all of this and deal with all of their family issues. So another fantasy series that I would recommend is the Daughters of the Moon series. Yes, I read both of these giant things. I also have the 11th book. I think there's like 15 or something, but it's about these four girls who live in LA. One of them can become invisible, one of them travels back in time, one reads minds, and one has premonitions, and they're all descended from goddesses, I believe, or one specific goddess, I can't remember exactly, but it's like them going through high school and having to stick together and keep their secret as well. The absolute end of the series kind of wrecked me. It's a lot to deal with. I literally still think about it. I don't remember much from the book other than how it ended. It was just like, oh my god, it was insane. But yeah, I really recommend these. And the last two books I would recommend for Speak Now would be the World's Best Fairy Tales. I think there's only 2 books, there might be 3, but I have volume 1 and volume 2. These are just really good freaking fairy tales. The Emperor's New Clothes, the original Sleeping Beauty tale, The Little Match Girl, oh my god. It has Hansel and Gretel, Rumpelstiltskin, The Little Mermaid is in volume 2, and Red Riding Hood, Beauty and the Beast, and this is all the originals. I just think it's really cool to see where all of these like Disney movies stem from, so I highly recommend these. Very fairy tale, very Speak Now. I had to take a quick break because it's now 77 degrees in here and I just needed to stand in front of a fan. So the next album is Red. I would describe this one as heartbroken. Taylor herself even called it like her one true heartbreak album. It's very classic, retro vibes. It's diverse as far as like with genres go. Like it doesn't really stick to one kind of thing, even though it's mostly kind of folky. I think it's just really simple songwriting. As far as like themes go, it's kind of adventurous and spontaneous as well, like with 22. to, or I Knew You Were Trouble. She was really like branching out into pop there. So first I would recommend The Last Song by Nicholas Sparks. I think probably anything by Nicholas Sparks would work really well with this album. This is a romance novel. They have this huge fight in it. They end up coming back together, so it's not like a completely heartbreak kind of novel. However, there's like family stuff. I don't want to spoil anything, even though most of you probably have seen the film. There's like a family issue, and it's gonna make you cry. It's also set by the beach. It's a romantic heartbreaker, so it's definitely red vibes. Next is All the Bright Places. This is also going to make you cry. It's two teenagers who are in love. This wasn't amazing to me, but a lot of people do really like it, so that's why I'm including it. It discusses depression kind of from both characters, because one of them, her sister, just passed away. Why are there so many books that I'm recommending with like a passed away sister? So she's dealing with her grief, and he also just struggles with depression. I don't know if I was necessarily crying like crazy, but I was like not able to sleep, like staying awake thinking about it. The next book I would recommend is the entire Ruby Oliver series, but mainly this one, which is the first book in the series. It's called The Boyfriend List. This book reads how All Too Well feels, I guess. It's just a complete like build climax. Like it's just, there are so many disasters leading up to like a huge disaster in this book. It deals with a girl who is a sophomore in high school and all of the things that are just going terribly wrong in her life. She starts dealing with her first panic attacks because of all of these issues that she's having, and she starts going to therapy for the first time, and it also documents that. It's just very like fall apart completely before things get better kind of book. I guess it's more like middle grade high school. I did read it for the first time when I was, I think, like 10. That might be why I like it so much. But yeah, it's so crazy. It's so young. It's so like heartbreaking kind of stuff. It's not gonna make you cry, but it's like this girl is going through so much. It's very much like she would have loved to have the Red Album with her. So the next series I want to recommend is the Bibliophile, I think that's how you say it, the Bibliophile mystery series by Kate Carlisle. This is still an active series. I think there's like 15 books now. There's a new one coming out that has to do with Rebecca by, I think the author's name is Du Maurier or something, but Taylor Swift did write Tolerate It based on that book. The main character does book restoration work, so just the overall vibes is very like old dusty library, which is what I think of when I think of Red. She's not a librarian, but she does like book restoration and is more into the like artfulness of books. So there's a lot of talk of very old, expensive, like first edition kind of books. So the vibes are really good, but also like people dying. There's people dying in it, because of course there are. I can't just read a book about books without people dying. So she ends up playing this detective kind of woman, but Peril in Paperback is by far the best one in that whole series. The main character who does the book restoration is invited to a birthday party of her friend's aunt, and she's the founder of a huge video game corporation, so she constructed her house to basically be a giant like video game. It's got like pinball machines and all these giant props, secret passageways, trap doors. This is what I live for. So she invites all of these people over to her house for her party, and the main character is all excited to go there to see her huge collection of rare paperback pulp fiction. And so it's like this giant library is also involved. I'm getting way too excited. And there ends up being a seance performed at the party, and then all the lights turn on and one guest is dead. And then there were none, I think is what it feels like. One of the Agatha Christie works, the guest was killed with like a poisoned cocktail, I believe, that was meant for the woman whose birthday it is. And so this main character tries to figure out who did it. I think eventually more and more guests start dropping, because I think they're out in the middle of nowhere in this mansion, and like, I don't know, I can't remember all the logistics, but like, this was such a good book. The whole series is pretty good, but like if you're gonna read one, read this one. So the next book I would recommend is If I Stay. This is the sequel. I'm holding up the sequel. I would recommend If I Stay by Gail Forman. This is the sequel. I don't have the original for some reason. Basically, this girl who is a cellist, she's pretty much trying to go to Juilliard. She's like a classical musician. Her and her whole family get into this car accident, and she's the only one that survives, but only kind of, because she's in a coma. And she has this boyfriend who's like the complete opposite of her. He plays rock music, he plays electric guitar, and they're like just very different from each other. While she's in this coma, he's like coming to visit her. It's kind of told in flashbacks because she's not actually conscious during the book, most of it anyways. The title If I Stay is kind of like what would happen if she would choose to essentially stay alive and continue this relationship with him, and kind of like just be without her whole family, which is, it's a lot. And then the sequel details her actually going into Juilliard, and her boyfriend ends up becoming a rock star. They drift apart, they come back together. It's like that heartbreak. It kind of makes me think of the one off of Folklore, honestly, but I still think this is more of a Red kind of book because of that like earth-shattering storyline. So the next album is 1989. I view this one as super carefree, gutsy in its own way. Like, she moves to New York by herself and pushes herself out of her comfort zone completely with this album, but it's also kind of harking back to the past. There's definitely retro influences. It's 80s pop music, also super trendy. Was that her most popular album? Her just full debut into the pop world. And I think the album is also really self-reflective. She lost him, but she found herself, and somehow that was everything. Just exploring of the self. So the first book I would recommend would be the Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children series. I'm not going to show you the entire, I have every single book plus the graphic novels. I'm not going to show all of them to you. I don't want to dig them all out. I haven't read the last two that have come out. I have them though, and this one I ordered it off Amazon. They literally sent me a signed copy, and I didn't ask for one. Like, I didn't expect this to happen, but like, but yeah, the main thing that really makes me think of 1989 with this series is that the story is told with photographs, and they're old-timey photographs that I believe the author found at like garage sales. He just like found these old photographs and used them to tell the story, and he like turns them into characters in his book when they're pictures of people. It is very much a fantasy novel. It's like this whole house of children that Miss Peregrine fosters, and they all have special abilities. There's some time jumps, retro vibes. It also has some romance in it. That whole thing just makes me think of 1989. The next book that I would recommend is Denton Little's Death Date. This story is about where they all know the day they're going to die. So they have like this party right before their death date that's essentially like exiting the world, and it's about this kid who has a very early death date, like while he's in high school. And there's also, I think it's a series now. I even read, yeah, there's at least a sequel. But this has a lot of dark humor, and that makes me think of 1989 because it's taking all of the bad in your life and kind of just coping and like making it work anyways. I don't want to spoil the book, but it laughs at like the gravity of the situation because it freaking would suck to know you're gonna die at like 17 years old. It makes you think about things. Next, I would recommend the Giver series. Taylor Swift was actually in the movie, which is really funny. I think it was around the 1989 era as well. This makes me think of 1989 because the main character is assigned a certain task within this society. All suffering is gone. Essentially, there's no conflict, inequality, divorce, unemployment, injustice. There's also no choice, and there's no music in this world. I don't think they even know what it is. Like, nobody really knows what singing is or what playing music is. However, the main character is assigned to essentially take all of these memories. I'm describing this so poorly, but he kind of has to make a decision of how he hates seeing everyone around him being like numb. I think it's really evolutionary what he does in this book, and that makes me think of 1989. It's gutsy. She chose a whole new genre to jump into. It's also a classic. You probably had to read it in high school. Next, I would recommend the Fame Game series and the LA Candy series by Lauren Conrad. Hear me out. What I really associate with this book in 1989 is the fact that it's about characters who move to LA. She gets cast for a reality show. When she moves to LA, she has to figure out her priorities and how things may not be how you expect them to be. In Taylor's case, she moves to New York and finds it's like everything she wanted. And this is similar, but I think the outcome's a little bit different. I also wrote several songs about the romances within this series, so that's pretty interesting. Next, I would recommend Bunheads by Sophie Flack. This is a book about a 19-year-old ballerina. It actually takes place in New York. It deals with her kind of striving for this thing and then dealing with burnout and trying to figure out exactly what she wants from life. There's a love interest. She kind of has to pick between like her dreams and her love interest. Does she dare give up the gilded confines of the ballet for the freedoms of everyday life? So it's not like she's giving up her dream like for this guy. It's just she kind of gets this taste of what it's like to not just obsess over this one thing and just her conflicts with that. It also talks about the just rigorous standards that ballerinas are held to, and the way like when they go through puberty and they develop like breasts or hips, that's seen as like a bad thing. So I think it's really good that it sheds a light on just how, I guess, toxic that environment can be, honestly. Also the injuries they deal with, oh my god, it talked about that a lot. It's just like, it's intense. So the last book I'd recommend for 1989 is The Mermaid's Mirror by L.K. Madigan. This is about a girl who lives by the sea, and she's always wanted to learn how to surf, but her father won't let her do that because he was a surfer and he had a near drowning accident, and something just keeps drawing her to the water, and she decides she's going to do this anyways, like screw what her dad says. Long story short, she sees this mermaid in the water. She feels like drawn to go find out more. This makes me think of 1989 because it's like jumping into that new life without really knowing what it'll be like or ignoring the warnings that others have said to you about it. Okay, my camera's about to die, so I have to do this really quickly, but Reputation is very vengeful and hardened and kind of abrasive to me, but it also is vulnerable kind of underneath that thick skin. She's very guarded and like selective with her relationships and just divulging her true self to people in this album. So first, I would recommend The Handmaid's Tale. It's dark, it's crazy, and it's disturbing. Within all this hardship, there's like relationships that are formed and certain people you can trust and like finding those people. This is another dystopian novel where essentially women are completely treated as like 100% like second-class citizens, only viewed as worthy when they can like have children. It's really disturbing, but I thought I would put this within this album. Next, I would recommend Vox, which is very similar to The Handmaid's Tale in a way. It's where one day the government decides that women are only allowed to speak no more than 100 words per day. I like how these kinds of books document the really strong women within these sorts of situations, and they find out who they can actually trust. I really liked this book. I didn't think it was some kind of Handmaid's Tale knockoff at all. Like, it was really freaking good. Huge page turner. Next, I would recommend The Woman in the Window. This is now a Netflix movie. It's this woman who deals with this huge tragedy in her life, so she ends up developing, is it agoraphobia? She can't go outside. She's afraid to like leave her New York City home. This is a huge thriller. She witnesses something through her window one night, and people try to convince her essentially that she's crazy. This is one of the first books I read with an unreliable narrator, and it was done so well, and it just kind of opened my mind to these types of books. 5 stars. It's edgy, it's dark, just like Reputation. The next book I would recommend is Gone Girl. The character is so nuts, and it's crazy. Women make me think of the way Taylor was portrayed in the media prior to the Reputation album. This woman suddenly disappears, and her husband ends up being like the main suspect. How do I not give too much away? It's very mentally interesting. It has a lot of her thoughts before things went wrong. It's nuts and creepy and a thriller. I would also recommend the Hunger Games series. You probably already read it. Ooh, I think this one really encapsulates the Reputation album really well because it's like Peeta and Katniss putting up that huge front like for the Capitol, and it's just so much about their reputation. If you don't know what the Hunger Games is, it is a dystopian novel where 2 people are picked from each area of this nation to go to the Hunger Games where they all fight to the death essentially, and it's like seen as this fun entertainment thing. So the 2 people from one district, they build up a whole reputation for themselves like in order to stay alive. It's very like playing into what the media wants, but at such a high stake kind of rate. That makes me think of Reputation. Next, I would recommend the Death by Bikini mysteries. This is all 3 books in one. It's about this girl who lives on a tropical island, and a lot of rich and famous people come to that island like to vacation. This family comes to vacation on this island, and she meets their son, and she's interested in him, but then this rock star's girlfriend ends up dead on the beach, strangled by her bikini top. She's kind of sleuthing out who did it. Really intense plot. It's another kind of like thriller genre, which I feel like just goes with Reputation really well. And all of the books, there's one called Death by Latte, and the other one is called Death by Denim. I don't think they all take place on the island. I think she moves at some point, but they're all just like these outrageous murders, and it's intense and climactic. So the next album is Lover. I view this one as like, it is really romantic, but it also has a lot of like obsessive love that it talks about, like with false god daring you to leave me just so I can try and scare you. Tumultuousness within a relationship also. It is super in love. It's just like it can be kind of obsessive. It's also outspoken. She gets very political on that album. Overall, it's really dreamy and like adorable, enamored, head over heels kind of stuff. But because it is kind of obsessive, I have to recommend the Shopaholic series. This is the first one, Confessions of a Shopaholic. The reason I recommend this is because it's about a girl who's dealing with her shopping addiction, and there's humor around it, but I think it does represent someone being addicted to something really well, and the way they kind of rationalize decisions in their head. I remember really liking that about this book. It's also really funny. Yeah, super obsessive. There is also a romance in it. habits that I believe was not toxic at all. Like, it wasn't obsessive, it was just like her spending habits that were like obsessive and toxic. But yeah, it's cute, it's romantic, and has that obsessive aspect about it. Next, I would recommend Me Before You by Jojo Moyes. This is heartbreaking, also kind of controversial. It's this girl who ends up taking this job taking care of this man who is paraplegic. He's disabled. They end up learning about each other and kind of having this romance, but then the ending is just, it's death by a thousand cuts. That's what the ending is. It's really romantic and cute, but also sad. And lastly, I would recommend The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. This has an amazing relationship in it, but it's also gonna make you cry. This sent me into an absolute spiral. This is one of the greatest John Green books I've ever read. Crazy sad, also such a good relationship that's like, it just crushes you with the way it ends. Next are my two favorite Taylor Swift albums of all time. First, we have Folklore. This obviously gives me really folky vibes, stories of the past. Nostalgia comes with that. It's really sentimental. There's also a lot of historical references in it. This one overall gives me a more masculine tone than Evermore. I see just kind of that contrast between the two. It's like just a little bit less feminine overall in the tone. My first recommendation for Folklore would be Last Witnesses, Unchildlike Stories. This is deeply disturbing and heartbreaking. It has to do with World War II. It's told through interviews of people who grew up during that time. So it's like all of the children of that war. So obviously it's very heartbreaking and disturbing to hear these accounts. It really follows that idea of don't write about the war, write about the burnt socks, I think the quote is. The trauma that they endured. This obviously goes hand in hand with Epiphany. There are some things you don't speak about. However, these people do actually speak about their experiences, and in many cases, a lot of those people are speaking about it for the first time. Next, I would recommend Patron Saints of Nothing. This is set partially in the Philippines, partially in the United States. It deals with a Filipino-American boy, and he finds out his cousin is murdered as part of the political issues going on in the Philippines to do with the war on drugs that is happening. So this definitely is really educational, but it is a fictional story. It just tells of a lot of the corruption and like shady things that are happening. I think it's very folklore because he talks about his childhood. I think he did grow up in the Philippines, and it has that nostalgia that makes me think of like Seven, but also obviously it's real world issues going on, which I mean obviously Folklore came out during a literal pandemic, so you know it's just kind of a mix of both, like this sentimentality mixed with real problems happening. The next book I would recommend is Flowers for Algernon. If you want to sob, let me tell you, oh my god. Folklore is heartbreaking in a different way from Red. It's like heartbreak about life in general, more so than just like a breakup. This is an older, kind of more classic novel. I've talked about this one before because I read it last year. It shows the two parallels between a mouse who is receiving treatment to become smarter versus a human who is also receiving that same treatment because they are living with a mental disability. And the outcome, you can see how the mouse is a little bit farther ahead in the treatment than him, and whatever happens to the mouse is like consequently happening to him. It's a lot to deal with. I'm telling you, but I'm pretty sure I rated this one 5 stars also. Next is my favorite book of all time that I'm recommending. It's called Distant Waves. All you really need to know about this is it's set on the Titanic, it's historical fiction, and there's ghosts. It's so good. There's also some romance in there. It's just, I think, the best historical fiction novel I've ever read. I don't know why I still don't have a copy of it. It's so good. It's so good. It's spooky. There's ghosts. There's like identity crises happening, historical fiction. What more could you want? So next I would recommend Ruined and Unbroken by Paula Morris. This is the first book, and then there's also a sequel called Unbroken. This has to do with ghosts. Again, it takes place in New Orleans. So freaking good. There's a girl who's staying with her aunt there who does tarot card readings for a living. I'm pretty sure there's a curse or like a prophecy that goes on, and she finds out people in this town who she's actually related to, who she had no idea she was related to. It's a lot. It's dramatic. It's spooky. It's sad because of the things you realize later on. It's just a lot. Next, I would recommend Looking for Alaska by John Green. If you want to cry for a week straight, this is what you're gonna read. Do you hear me? This is also a Hulu series, I believe, that made me cry for another week. It was a really good adaptation. I'm destroyed. It's this boy who goes to boarding school where his father went, and he goes and finally makes like friends for the first time in his life. I don't even have words. It's very folklore in the sense that like things you don't see coming, tragedy, sadness, so much sadness, just dealing with all of that. And there's also just this nostalgia because he like grows so close with these people and then horrible things happen. That's all I'm gonna say on that. Next, I would recommend The Glass Castle. This makes me think of Seven in a way, but like not pleasantly. This is a memoir. Looking back on her childhood and realizing it wasn't a happy time for her, but at the same time, she does not blame her parents for the things that were going on. Heartbreaking in a way, but also just forgiving of the people who kind of made her childhood not great. It's really good. It has some really good scenarios happening in it. This is also a movie that was really good. It's set in the 70s at the time the author was growing up. I think it's the 70s, maybe the 60s, but yeah, this was a 5-star read. I had to read it for an English class in high school. So good, so sad. It gives you a lot to think about. Next, I would recommend Between Shades of Grey by Ruta Sepetys. This also has to deal with World War II. Oh my god, I cried so much during this book. I actually read this in 8th grade, but I still remember how it ends because it was earth-shattering for me. It's set in Lithuania during World War II, and this whole family and them they're taken by the Soviets, actually. Now that I'm older, this might give me an identity crisis just because of that. You know, it has family relationships sticking together through hardships. Really fucking sad and has to deal with war. Okay, so the last album is Evermore. I view this one, as I said before, as the feminine counterpart to Folklore. I also am getting really luxurious vibes from Evermore. A lot of like gold, flashy kind of stuff, like with Cowboy Like Me or Gold Rush. I also view it as like celebratory festivities happening, like in 'Tis the Damn Season or like Champagne Problems. Even though it's sad, it's like the idea of an engagement. Also, there's a lot of mysterious vibes. Like I think about like No Body, No Crime. The mystery is definitely more subtle than Folklore, I think. First, I would recommend the Selected Poems of Emily Dickinson. This feels so much like Evermore, the song. Also, Ivy. It's just the style of the writing is very much like Taylor's writing in Evermore. I think she might have even been inspired by this poet. She writes a lot about nature, immortality, death. You know, at the time she was alive, there was a lot of death going on. Next, I would recommend The Bad Seed by William March. This is really creepy and it deals with a child serial killer, essentially, which was really revolutionary for the time because not only were women not seen as people capable of committing murder, but also like a child. It was just really mind-blowing. Obviously very mysterious. Nobody knows who's killing these people until like, oops, it's the 5-year-old girl. Next, I would recommend Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. This is probably the best thriller I've ever read. It's so good. It's set in this tiny town in Missouri. This woman who does reporting comes to report on this murder in her town. This also kind of reminds me of The Bad Seed a little bit, but she doesn't know who's doing all these killings of these young girls. Whoever is doing it will really blow your mind. It's a lot. There's a lot going on in this book, and the reporter, she's also dealing with her own like mental health issues. It's just so much. Next, I would recommend A Simple Favor by Darcy Bell, purely because it's literally No Body, No Crime. The movie's a little bit better than the book, so if you want to watch the movie, do that. But there's like life insurance policies going on. It's shady business, murder, mystery. Next, I would recommend Let It Snow by John Green because it makes me think of 'Tis the Damn Season. It's 3 stories happening on Christmas Eve all at the same time, and you kind of see each one unfolding, and then they all like end up in the same place at the end. It's really good, and it actually has 3 authors working on it. Each one does like a different collection of people, and then they all meet up. Next, I would recommend A Break with Charity because this has to do with people being accused of being a witch during the Salem witch trials. So that makes me think of like, you know how Willow's kind of like a witchy song. I didn't rate this one that high. I don't remember it that well, but like the vibes, I think about this book constantly just because it was like, it just had those witch vibes, and it's like historical fiction. So I think that really fits into the Evermore themes, and I think maybe someone would like that book. Next is Peeled by Joanne Bauer. I read this in high school. It's a mystery. It has to do with a girl who is working as a high school journalist. She has to uncover the truth about things. There's like rumors going on. There's a lot of tensions, and she has to essentially find out the truth. So that makes me think of the mysterious vibes of Evermore. And lastly, I would recommend What Happened to Goodbye by Sarah Dessen. This is about a girl who she has to move around constantly, and she always gives people a new name with every new town she lives at, but then she moves somewhere where she thinks she just wants to be herself finally, so she actually gives people her real name. And there's some romance going on in here, and she is having an identity crisis because she doesn't really know who she is after lying to people for all these years. Yeah, she meets this guy, tries to find out who she really is after lying. She's very mysterious, and she even can't like figure herself out, so that makes me think of the mystery of Evermore again. So yeah, that is all my recommendations. That is a lot. I don't know how long this video is going to be, but if you enjoyed this, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Let me know down below what other videos you want to see. If you want to see like individual albums and me going through the songs, I can try to do that and have a different recommendation for each song. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you all next week for another one. Bye guys. I know that we